In a tranquil village between rolling hills and dense forests, life was leisurely. People resided in humble dwellings, tilled the soil, and respected the cycles of nature. It was a village where every villager knew every other by face and stride, and rumor was as common as morning dew. A small hut on the outskirts of the village, time-worn, with a leaning chimney and a tangled herb-grown patch. There lived an old man in this humble dwelling. He said little and went out only occasionally from his garden. He had the same garments each day, mended and worn, and his gray beard descended to his chest like a waterfall of ice. Children used to whisper about him. Some claimed he was a wizard. Others claimed he had buried treasure in his own backyard. Adults, though more discreet, treated him cautiously. He possessed no relatives, no visitors, and no evident motive, but his eyes were sharp, and his hands never stopped moving. One year, the village faced a terrible drought. The river that fed the fields thinned to a trickle. Crops withered under the sun, and the villagers grew anxious. They prayed, consulted the village elders, and even sacrificed a goat in an ancient rite, but the skies remained cloudless, and the earth stayed parched. In desperation, the villagers agreed to convene. People quarreled, they wept, and some accused their neighbors of hoarding water. Amidst all the chaos, one of the young men stood up and volunteered to seek the guidance of the old man who dwelled at the edge of the village. A hush fell over the gathering. Some scoffed, others were skeptical, but desperation has a way of making people consider the unlikely. And so, a group was sent to the cottage. They knocked, and the door creaked slowly open. The old man stood in the dark, his face unreadable. They explained the circumstances, pleaded for advice, and only as a last hope asked if he knew how to produce rain. The old man listened quietly. After a long pause, he stepped back and gestured for them to come in. Inside, the house was cluttered but clean. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling, and strange trinkets lined the shelves. He walked over to a wooden chest, opened it slowly, and removed a small pouch filled with seeds. "These are drought seeds," he said, his voice dry like leaves in the wind. "Plant them not for food, but for hope. Tend to them as you would a child. Do not harvest them. Let them grow." The villagers stared in confusion. One of them voiced the doubt. "We need rain, not flowers." The old man did not complain. "You pleaded for help. This is all I have left." The group returned to the village with the seeds and the information. There was argument, but eventually they determined to accept the old man's word. So, they plowed a patch of ground in the middle of the village and planted the seeds. They irrigated with what was remaining of the river, rationing it out to keep the ground moist. Villagers took turns keeping watch over the plot by day, weeding, checking for sprouts, and speaking to the shoots as if words themselves contained water. Weeks passed. The drought continued. But the plants grew, they weren't crops. They didn't bear fruit. Their stalks were long, their leaves wispy, and their flowers, when they bloomed, pale and unadorned, but radiant in their simplicity. People began to sit beside them in the evenings, sitting silently, talking softly, occasionally praying. Children played beneath their canopy. Old women sewed beside them. The plants had evolved into a sanctuary of sorts. And something strange happened. The village began to move despite the drought. People fought less. They shared more. No longer obsessed with profit and harvest, they began to worry about survival and community. They traded meals, helped repair each other's houses, and sang old songs that hadn't been heard in years. The flowers continued to bloom, tall and unyielding in the face of the sun's heat. Birds settled in their shade. Bees appeared where previously they did not exist. Gradually, imperceptibly, the soil around the plants grew richer, darker. Whenever it rained, it was not a storm but a slow, steady drizzle that went on through the night and into the morning. The crops began to grow again. The river returned. And still, the villagers did not remove the strange-appearing plants. They remained, year after year, as a testament to something that could not be consumed or sold, but which had seen them through nonetheless. The old man passed away quietly that winter. He was found by a boy sitting in his garden, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees as though he had simply slept. There was no sign of agony. His cottage was empty except for the herbs, the ornaments, and one last pouch of seeds on his table, tied up with string. They buried him beside the patch of earth where the flowers grew. Years went by, the village changed. Newcomers settled in, the old ones out. The drought became a memory, but the story of the flowers remained. Year by year, the seeds were planted again, not for food, but for hope. Years afterward, a traveler passed through town and noticed the strange clump of flowers downtown. He asked questions about them and was told the story, of a drought, a silent man, and seeds that changed everything. The visitor inquired, but how did planting flowers save the town? A frail old lady who had lived long enough to remember the day looked up at him with affection and said, "The flowers did not make the rain. But they reminded us what we'd forgotten, that hope is something you plant."